I still remember the exact sound my truck tires made when I turned onto that gravel road. That slow crunching noise I'd heard 1,000 times before, except this time something fell off immediately. You know how your brain notices a problem before your eyes fully catch up to it? Yeah, it was one of those moments. The birds were gone. There was mud everywhere, fresh tire tracks cutting through the grass like somebody had dragged construction equipment across the property all week long. And sitting near the edge of my driveway was a stack of lumber wrapped in plastic, like Christmas morning for a contractor. I slowed the truck down and just stared ahead thinking, what the hell is going on out here? Then I saw it. Concrete. Fresh concrete. Big square slab. Rebar sticking up into the air like rusted antennae. Wooden framing still nailed around the edges. At first my brain genuinely refused to process what I was looking at, because there's no normal reason another human being would pour a damn foundation on somebody else's land. But that's exactly what happened. I had left town for 10 days to help my brother in Tennessee deal with some family stuff after his surgery, and while I was gone, my neighbors decided my property line was apparently more of a suggestion than an actual legal boundary. Now to understand why this whole thing hit me so hard, you gotta understand the property itself. I bought those 5 acres outside Mason Ridge almost 8 years ago because I was tired of people. Not in the dramatic, I hate humanity way, more like, I wanted peace. I wanted quiet mornings, deer crossing the field at sunrise, no HOA president measuring my grass with a ruler, no guy named Brent emailing me because my trash cans were visible from the street for 14 minutes too long. Just land, trees, silence. The lot next to mine had always been empty too. Old farmland nobody touched for years except teenagers sneaking out there to drink beer around bonfires. Then about a year ago, this couple moved in next door, Derek and Melissa Conway. At first, totally normal, friendly enough. Derek had one of those loud contractor handshakes where he squeezes your hand like he's trying to establish dominance before the conversation even starts. But whatever, harmless guy behavior. Melissa smiled a lot, but always had this weird energy like she was silently judging everything around her. You know the type. The kind of woman who compliments your house while looking disappointed in it at the same time. A few months after they bought the lot, survey flags started appearing near the property line. Little orange markers, construction stakes, spray paint on the grass, standard stuff. Didn't bother me. People build houses all the time out there. Derek mentioned once they were planning some custom dream home. And honestly, I didn't care enough to ask questions. As long as they stayed on their side of the line, we were good. But looking back now, there were signs. Little comments that didn't sit right at the time. Derek once joked that my driveway curved too far into the useful part of the land, which I laughed off because who says something like that unless they're already staring at your property wondering how they'd use it? Then Melissa made a comment about how they wish their future garage had better access to the road, and she pointed directly toward my side like she was mentally redesigning my acreage in real time. Still, I never imagined they'd actually act on it. So there I was, standing in the dirt after driving 10 hours home, looking at a giant concrete foundation sitting several feet inside my property line. Not close to it. Not, maybe the survey's wrong, close. I'm talking obviously, aggressively over the line. I walked straight to the metal survey markers I had installed years earlier because I already knew what I was going to find. Same markers, same coordinates, same boundary. The slab was deep inside my land. And the craziest part? They didn't even stop construction while I was standing there. I could hear generators humming behind the tree line, nail guns popping in the distance. Workers laughing like this was just another Tuesday. I called Derek right there on the spot. He answered on the second ring, sounding weirdly relaxed. I said, "Hey Derek, you poured a foundation on my property." There was this pause. Not confusion, not shock, more like annoyance that I'd interrupted his day. Then he goes, "No, our builder measured everything. Real defensive, real quick." I told him I had the survey map in my hand and his slab was over the line by several feet. Another pause. Then he hits me with, "Well, maybe your markers are wrong." That sentence right there told me everything I needed to know because innocent people don't jump straight to challenging legal property markers unless they've already convinced themselves they deserve your land more than you do. Now let me pause the story for a second because this is where a lot of people make the biggest mistake imaginable. They assume property disputes work on common sense. They don't. They work on paperwork, surveys, county records, and whichever side stays calm long enough to document everything. According to standard procedure, if there's even a question about a property boundary, construction is supposed to stop immediately until a licensed survey confirms the line. That's basic builder protocol. Any contractor worth a damn knows this. Which means one of two things happened here. Either Derek's builder was wildly incompetent, or somebody knowingly gambled that I wouldn't fight back once the foundation was already poured. And trust me, that gamble happens more often than people think. From a legal perspective, once permanent construction starts going up, a lot of homeowners panic because now emotions get involved. People start thinking, well, maybe I should compromise, because tearing out concrete sounds extreme. That's the psychological pressure tactic. This is a psychological trap people use in property disputes all the time. Create a situation expensive enough and awkward enough that the other person feels guilty enforcing their own rights. It's basically legalized social intimidation. They count on you being conflict avoidant. They count on you not wanting to look like the bad guy. And honestly, Derek absolutely had that energy. The kind of guy who mistakes politeness for weakness. But here's the thing most people don't realize. If you allow somebody to permanently occupy part of your property without formally challenging it, things can get ugly years later. Easements, adverse possession claims, access rights. Suddenly that small compromise becomes a legal tumor attached to your land forever. The lesson here is, the moment somebody tests a boundary, literally or figuratively, your response teaches them how far they can push you. And Derek was about to learn mine the expensive way. The next 2 days were weirdly quiet, and honestly, that silence bothered me more than if Derek had come over screaming. No apology, no follow-up call. No, hey man, let's figure this out. Nothing. Just trucks coming and going from the construction site like we hadn't just had a conversation about his foundation sitting inside my property line. Every morning I'd wake up, pour coffee, look out toward the edge of the field, and see more materials showing up. Lumber, concrete blocks, pallets of shingles. At one point they even dropped off windows. Windows. That's when it finally clicked in my head. These people genuinely believed momentum was going to beat legality. Like if they built fast enough, I'd eventually throw my hands up and say, well, I guess there's a house there now. And honestly, that strategy probably works on a lot of people. So I called a lawyer. Now, I expected some dramatic movie moment where the attorney slams his hand on the desk and says something badass about property rights. But reality's less cinematic than that. His office smelled like old coffee and printer toner, and the guy spent the first 15 minutes silently reading my survey while chewing ice from a styrofoam cup. Finally, he looks at me and says, well, this is either gross incompetence or calculated stupidity, which honestly became my favorite legal phrase of all time. He told me the first thing we needed was a fresh license survey because courts love current documentation. Didn't matter that my old survey was accurate. Didn't matter that the markers were visible. We needed something recent enough to remove every possible excuse. A week later, the new survey came back, exactly the same as the old one. The foundation wasn't barely over the line either, which somehow made the whole thing more insulting. The slab crossed several feet into my property like somebody had confidently ignored every marker on purpose. My lawyer actually laughed when he saw it. Not because it was funny exactly, more like the exhausted laugh people make when another human being behaves unbelievably stupid. He drafted a certified demand letter that afternoon. Short, direct. Remove the foundation voluntarily, or I'd remove it myself and pursue damages afterward. Simple, reasonable, crystal clear. 3 days later, Derek finally responded through his attorney. And man, this was where the whole thing turned from construction mistake into straight-up ego war. Suddenly, the tone changed completely. Their lawyer called it an unfortunate boundary misunderstanding and asked whether I'd consider selling them that strip of land instead. Then they floated the idea of granting a permanent easement. Basically, they wanted me to legally surrender part of my property because they'd already poured concrete on it. Like, congratulations, your trespassing has unlocked a negotiation phase. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading the letter while laughing to myself because it was such classic bully logic. They create the problem, then act like compromise is the mature solution. But the truth was, I had plans for that section of land. I wanted to build a workshop there eventually, maybe a detached garage. More importantly, though, I didn't like the principle of it. Maybe that sounds stubborn, but property lines exist for a reason. If somebody can bulldoze over your boundary and pressure you into working something out, then ownership stops meaning anything. So I told my lawyer no. No sale. No easement. Remove the foundation. And here's where Derek made the dumbest decision of the entire situation. He ignored the letter. Not only ignored it, construction activity continued. Workers started stacking framing lumber near the slab. Somebody delivered plumbing materials. I even caught one crew measuring for wall layouts one morning. At that point, my lawyer stopped being amused and started sounding genuinely offended on my behalf. According to standard procedure, once formal notice is served in a property dispute, continuing construction becomes incredibly dangerous legally because now there's documented awareness. Translation: Derek couldn't claim ignorance anymore. Every dollar he spent after that point was basically him betting against reality. Then came demolition day. I slept weirdly good the night before, which surprised me. You'd think I'd be stressed out, but honestly, there's something peaceful about reaching the end of your patience. Decision already made. Papers filed. No more debating. Around 7 in the morning, I heard diesel engines coming down the gravel road. I stepped outside with coffee in hand, just as the demolition crew rolled in. Huge excavator. Concrete breaker attachment. Dump truck behind it. Loud enough to shake the windows a little. My lawyer arrived 10 minutes later wearing jeans and work boots like he was attending the world's most aggressive barbecue. The surveyor showed up too because we wanted everything documented before a single piece of concrete got touched. The air that morning felt heavy, humid, storm clouds building way off in the distance. One of the demolition guys walked the slab perimeter with spray paint while the surveyor confirmed the property markers again. Everybody was calm, professional, which somehow made the whole thing feel even more brutal. No yelling, no drama, just procedure. Before the crew started, my lawyer sent one final notice to Derek's attorney informing them demolition would begin that morning unless they immediately intervened. No response. So at exactly 11:42 a.m., the excavator operator lowered the hydraulic breaker onto the corner of that foundation and pulled the trigger. The sound was unbelievable. Not loud in a sharp, explosive way. More like the earth itself cracking open. The concrete split almost immediately, jagged fractures racing across the slab, while chunks broke apart under the pressure. Dust shot into the air. Rebar bent sideways with this horrible metallic screech. And I gotta be honest with you. After weeks of frustration, it was deeply satisfying to watch. Not because I enjoy destruction, but because boundaries were finally being enforced physically instead of argued philosophically. About 20 minutes into demolition, Derek came flying down the gravel road in a black pickup truck like a man entering a hostage situation. He slammed the brakes so hard dirt sprayed everywhere. Him and Melissa jumped out screaming before the truck even fully stopped. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I remember Derek's face was bright red, veins bulging out of his neck while he stormed toward the excavator waving papers around. Melissa looked even worse somehow. Furious in that cold, controlled way where every sentence sounds rehearsed for future courtroom testimony. She kept yelling about property destruction and criminal damages, while chunks of their illegal foundation were literally being loaded into a dump truck behind her. My lawyer stepped forward before I could even say anything. Calmest man alive. Hands in pockets. He handed Derek copies of both surveys, copies of the certified notices, and proof of delivery confirmations. Derek barely looked at them. He just kept shouting louder like volume could reverse mathematics. Then came my favorite moment of the entire ordeal. The excavator operator, this older guy named Leon who looked emotionally unshakable, leaned out the machine window and goes, "Y'all done?" "I'm on the clock." I almost lost it laughing. Derek threatened lawsuits for another 10 minutes while the demolition crew continued tearing apart the slab piece by piece behind him. And that visual right there perfectly summed up the entire situation. All rage, no leverage. By late afternoon, the foundation was gone. Completely gone. Rebar hauled away. Concrete loaded into trucks. Dirt graded back down smooth like nothing had ever been there. If you drove past the property that evening without context, you'd never know an entire legal disaster had existed there 12 hours earlier. Then came the court battle. And honestly, it dragged for months. Derek sued first, claiming wrongful destruction of property, emotional distress, construction losses, all kinds of dramatic nonsense clearly written by an attorney billing hourly. But the problem with lying in court is documents don't get emotional. Surveys don't care about your feelings. Certified letters don't disappear because you're offended. Every piece of evidence pointed one direction. Their builder ignored visible property markers. They continued construction after formal notice. They rejected multiple opportunities to stop voluntarily. From a legal perspective, they were cooked. The judge actually sounded irritated during the hearing. At one point, he asked Derek directly why construction continued after receiving notice of encroachment, and Derek gave this rambling answer about good faith assumptions that basically translated into, "I thought I could win anyway." That did not go over well. Final ruling? The court declared the entire structure an unlawful encroachment on my property. I was fully within my rights to remove it. Derek and Melissa were ordered to reimburse demolition costs, survey expenses, and a painful amount of legal fees. Their contractor took a hit too because apparently eyeballing property boundaries isn't considered a professional surveying method in the state of Missouri. Shocking, I know. And the craziest part? About 8 months later, they started construction again, this time several feet farther away from my property line. Amazing how accurate measurements become once consequences show up. Looking back now, the wildest part of this whole situation isn't even the concrete foundation. It's how confident Derek and Melissa were the entire time. That's the thing people don't talk about enough when it comes to neighbor disputes or property conflicts. A lot of folks genuinely believe confidence can replace legality. If they act certain enough, push hard enough, move fast enough, eventually everyone around them just folds from exhaustion. And honestly, in everyday life, that strategy probably works way more than it should. Most people hate confrontation. Most people would rather sacrifice a little piece of themselves than deal with months of tension, lawyers, paperwork, awkward driveways, and somebody glaring at them from across the fence every morning. But property disputes are dangerous specifically because a little piece can turn permanent real fast. The lesson here is boundaries matter most when somebody tests them. Not just land boundaries either, life boundaries. Because once somebody realizes they can pressure you into surrendering something that legally belongs to you, they rarely stop there. And I think psychologically, that's what this whole thing became for Derek. It stopped being about the land pretty early on. It became ego. He couldn't handle being told no. Every step after that was escalation fueled by pride. This is a psychological trap people fall into constantly. They become so committed to winning the argument that they ignore the reality underneath it. And look, I know some people watching this are probably thinking, man, I would have just sold them the strip of land and avoided the drama. Fair enough. Honestly, if they had approached me respectfully before pouring concrete, maybe we could have worked something out. Maybe. But trying to negotiate after building on somebody else's property feels a lot like a bank robber asking to keep the money because the getaway car was expensive. That's not compromise. That's pressure. According to standard procedure, the second a property dispute appears, everything should pause until surveys and records confirm ownership. That process exists for a reason. Once concrete gets poured, emotions take over, and rational people suddenly start acting like medieval kings fighting over invisible borders. And weirdly enough, the land feels quieter now. For months after the lawsuit ended, Derek barely looked in my direction. Melissa stopped pretending to smile. Their new house eventually went up on the correct side of the line, farther back from the driveway, exactly where it should have been from day one. Every now and then I'll see Derek outside while I'm getting the mail, and there's always this tension hanging in the air like we both remember the sound of that excavator tearing through concrete. Me personally, I don't regret a thing, because at the end of the day, if somebody builds on your land and faces zero consequences, then what exactly was the point of owning it in the first place? So now I want to ask you guys, if you came home and found a neighbor building on your property, would you tear the whole thing down too? Or would you try to settle it peacefully? And be honest, because once lawyers, money, and ego get involved, being nice gets complicated real fast.